broader world didn't want Black Americans to be able to have this much freedom because freedom means something different.
This is the reality the free black men, women, and children faced in the late 1800s. For Wiley Jones and many others who were trying to build a new way of life for themselves, they were born of black women serving as slaves and fathered by slave owners. There was a stark divide between black and white, Wiley having one foot on either side of the line. He wasn't fully black and not fully white. In fact, the black part of him caused the white people to push him further away until he was in a completely separate category, colored.
Wiley Jones laid the blueprint for what becomes Jay-Z and Rick Ross, right? In the terms of, think about Rick Ross now owns this big ranch farm that everybody goes to, and he has this big car show now. Jay-Z, in regards to going from being a crack dealer to being an artist to now being displayed in the Brooklyn Museum. This idea, Willie Jones was the first one to do it. You know, Wiley Jones is the OG of Black entrepreneurship and Black empowerment through Black economics. So I wanted to say that first before I moved on. He was a hustler. I mean, this hustler mentality. You know what I mean? Jay-Z said, I turn ice in the water and I sell fire to hell. I'm a hustler, baby. I'll sell water to a whale. And that's what Wiley did. He sell water to a whale. I mean, people have to believe in you to buy from you. You don't put your Black folks, because money is so scarce for many Black people, they don't spend money frivolously. And that's why, even when you think about Young Jeezy, Jay-Z, with these last couple presidential elections, now getting to the political aspect of it, it's easy to make that transition. Or even with Jay-Z and Beyonce with the Black Lives Matter movement itself, right? It's easy to make that transition because people assume that the more money that you get, the more assimilated you're going to be. But in turn, the more money that most people like Wiley Jones got, the more empowered they were. The more they sought more freedom, the more they sought to free others.
As Wiley rose in his social status in politics and business, he was mentioned in Pine Bluff newspapers hundreds of times. The paper was called The Graphic, and articles were rarely negative. They mostly praised his building of businesses for the city of Pine Bluff. Sometimes the articles referred to him as a black man, sometimes as a Negro, and sometimes as colored. A few times he is referred to as a slur that I had never heard of before, mulatto. The literal definition of the word is having one black parent and one white, but it was used as an insult to devalue people. You may not know the name of Wiley Jones, but there is another name from that time period that you probably learned about in American history class, Jim Crow, population that was on the rise. While they didn't become known as Jim Crow laws until later in the 1870s, they were still in effect before they were official. They were social norms of the dominantly white population called black codes. These encouraged discriminations were used as a tool to hold down the new population who were making a huge leap building their communities. Dr. Najee K. Baptist is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Arkansas. He specializes in black politics, social movements, and political behavior.
The 13th Amendment does not end slavery completely. It says you're free except you being made to be a criminal. So then America has started its endeavor, its bloodthirst to turn us back into slaves through the prison industrial complex. So yeah, vagrancy laws. He could stand on the wrong corner. That's why cities like Pine Bluff were so important, because you knew that you weren't going to be carrying anywhere, right? Oh, he's walking down the street and he eyeballs a white woman like Emmett Till and he's gone, right? Or you look, you have a horse that's better than the sheriff, and he wants to kill you. You know what I mean? Who knows? This white man comes and does whatever he wants to in the city, and then someone describes you as the assailant because you fit the description. This is nothing new. That's what I'm saying. Whether it's 1881, 1981, 2024, the pattern continues. Right? This is a continuation, and it was even the argument goes that enslaved Africans saw slavery as marginally better than Jim Crow, because at least in Jim Crow, slave owners had some initiative to keep you alive because you were property and you benefited. But doing Jim Crow, it's every man for himself. It's state of nature. There is what laws protect, what policies protect us in Jim Crow. Who are we still? We're even less than property then. We are, Black death is expendable. Black bodies are expendable at any time. You know what I mean? And then there's this desire to keep us in place that Wiley knew he had to fight back against.
My name is Brian Rogers, and I am the Adult Education Interpretive Specialist at the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center. As slavery ends in the 1865 and Reconstruction begins, the 15th Amendment is passed. Black men have the right to vote. They have political power. There were quite a few Black men who were elected throughout the South. As I mentioned, there were 95 or so Black men that served in the House of Representatives and the Senate here in Arkansas. And so the Reconstruction period could be looked at as kind of a golden age of Black entrepreneurship. It is definitely the beginnings of Black entrepreneurship. And then as you see Black codes and Jim Crow laws come into vogue, there has to be somebody providing services to Black people because they're free now, right? They want these services. They need these services. They have to be able to provide for their families. They need to shop. They need clothes. They need food. There are restaurants popping up. And so Black people are owning and operating these restaurants.
I remember vividly sitting in American history class in high school in rural Arkansas. It was a little town called Hattieville, and we were learning about the Jim Crow era in our textbooks. But there were maybe 2 paragraphs about the time period. Modern-day public education doesn't give enough information about the time period or what it was like. You might be surprised to know that Jim Crow wasn't a politician. He wasn't even a person. It was the name of the stage character played by a white man named Thomas Dartmouth Rice. This was part of a minstrel show. This is a performance where white people would wear makeup to appear Black, and thus where we get the term blackface. These characters were supposed to be impressions of Black people, and they were always subservient, clumsy, and clownish. This was all the way back in the 1830s before Wiley was even born. But the acting character of Jim Crow became so popular that they became interchangeable with calling someone Black or worse. When the new laws were put in place, they adopted the name of the character, but essentially were just an underhanded way of calling them Negro laws.
And the election law of 1891 standardized the ballot. It required a secret ballot. And so you end up with a sort of de facto literacy test. Arkansas didn't have an actual literacy test, but Arkansas had with that secret ballot system, and with the standardized ballot, it meant that if you were illiterate or maybe, even just barely literate, it would be very difficult to understand the ballot and make your choice. And so it just is very discouraging. Disfranchisement doesn't always look like a literacy test or some kind of racial box, that's checked or not. Disfranchisement can come simply in the form of discouraging people who used to vote from continuing to vote. So the election law of 1891 really then will lock down the power of conservatives in the form of the Democratic Party in Arkansas. And so they'll follow that. The effect of the election law of 1891 is going to be to pull out many Black voters, not all, but many Black voters, and a handful of white voters too. And so then, with the elections that follow, the conservative Democratic element is going to retake control of the state government. And so then they follow with all of these laws to set up what we call Jim Crow.
Dr. Kelly Houston Jones is an assistant professor of history at Arkansas Tech. She specializes in American slavery.
So actually, when you think about the years, it's quite a bit of time that passes, right? Between, if we said 1870-ish, if we said around 1870 as the point where Wiley Jones is able to launch his own life on his own terms, that's, in about 20 years later, he's watching that fizzle away. So on one hand, 20-ish years is a long time. On the other hand, it's just this brief little whiff of freedom that folks are able to enjoy. That, again, the conservative element claws this back. The reason that Black men are disfranchised in Arkansas and elsewhere is not because they were not effective political actors. It's because they were very good at organizing politically, voting, holding office. They were beating the Democrats in the elections. And so the Democrats are going to find a way to keep that from happening without seeming to blatantly violate the Constitution.
Cerise Jones Branch is the Dean of Liberal Arts and Communication at Arkansas State University.
This is American history. It's not made up. Nobody imagined it. It can all be documented, and nobody's history is a feel-good history all the time. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that people have made decisions in the past that sometimes have long-range consequences, and we need to sit with that and figure out how to do better moving forward. And you don't do that by sweeping it under the rug and pretending it didn't happen, especially when it can all be thoroughly documented. Tell the stories, tell the stories of American history. I also think it's important because, once again, back to a point that I made originally, everybody needs to see themselves in the history. Everybody's story needs to be told. They need to hear their stories. They need to know their stories so that we all have a sense of how we fit into the fabric that we call America.
Wiley Jones, like most of the free people around him, didn't know how to read or write, but he had a sharp mind.
So much so that he decided he wanted to own some horses. And so he began to purchase these horses and started harness racing. One horse that he owned, Excalibur, won international races in Canada, even setting a track record at a track in Windsor, Canada. He needed a place to train his horses, to house his horses. And so sometime in the 1870s, we don't know the exact date, he had a 55-acre park constructed in Pine Bluff that would house his horses, his herd of cattle that he owned. It would be a training facility for his horses. And it also evolved into a park for the community, for the Black community of Pine Bluff. The park hosted bike races, baseball games, community functions, of course, harness racing, and many other things that the Black community needed or wanted in the area. They did skeet shooting, all different types of outdoor events at this 55-acre park that Wiley Jones had constructed in Pine Bluff.
Brilliantly, Wiley knew that if he built this park that was a hub of entertainment, that there needed to be a way for easy transportation there and back.
In 1886, Wiley Jones becomes the first African American in the country to receive the franchise rights to own and operate a mule-driven streetcar line in Pine Bluff. And it was a very small line. It operated on just a few blocks from downtown Pine Bluff to the Wiley Jones Park, but it was still the first. During the operation of the Wiley Jones streetcar line, Wiley Jones was sued There was another streetcar line, Citizen Streetcar Line, claimed that Wiley Jones and his streetcar line infringed upon their contract with the city of Pine Bluff to operate a streetcar line. And this case went to court. And while it was making its way through the court system, Wiley Jones just decided to buy the other streetcar line. So he bought the other streetcar line, the two merged. Wiley Jones served for a time as president of the combined streetcar line, eventually selling it to the city. And that streetcar line continues to operate today under a different name, Southeast Arkansas Transit, which is still the city public transit system in Pine Bluff today.
We live in an industrialized city now, but imagine a place that has little to nothing in it, a little small rinky-dink town, right? A population 2,000. Imagine, like, I live in a rural area in Arkansas with population is about 1,000 or so. You know, you only have one main store, which everybody goes to, everybody visits. You only have one main gym, or, you know, the judges are the same people that you know and interact with. So these communities become important, and these the Black people in those communities are there to support each other as much as they possibly can while trying to advance themselves and their families. You know, these, again, the creator of Blacks enclaves of empowerment and pushing people to want to do better and to do more is part of Wiley's MO. His entire life is dedicated to this. It wasn't about providing space and opportunity for Black empowerment, you know, and Pine Bluff was ideal for this because there was a majority Black consensus and population there, and there was little interference from you know, white Arkansas that didn't want Black folks to thrive. There was no state government intervention. They left Black folks to their own devices. And when they left Black folks to their own devices, what happens is you end up getting a person like Wiley Jones that gives you know, $125,000 for the Second Street car, which is equivalent in 1890, which is equivalent to $4.3 million. $4.3 million. And that streetcar wasn't just for Wiley. You know, it was to make business more efficient and effective. You know, it wasn't like Rick Ross is buying a Wingstop for himself, make himself feel good. You know, it's like someone creating the first airline. You know, and saying, hey, listen, we can travel faster, we can get our goods faster, we can make things happen faster in the city. You know, and then we don't think about the environmental concerns about unpaved roads and what that means on your feet and dust, smelling all that and getting into your lungs and the fatigue of having to work, because these are still working people. And he cared enough to be able to create, again, a more mainstream, a streamlined advance. I mean, these advances in technology that he made sure Black people were part of in Pine Bluff.
Most of those newspaper articles that I mentioned earlier were in reference to Wiley's park and his horses. The newspaper itself was established in 1887, and there's so much before that time that we don't even know because it wasn't recorded. We only know about several significant things that were happening in Pine Bluff at the same time as Wiley's explosion in business. In 1880, a Black man named James Anderson was lynched. 12 years later, 2 more Black men were lynched, and the mob was described in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette as some of the best citizens, and no masks were used. Racial violence was blatant, and the members of the mob were never brought to justice. By 1892, Pine Bluff was 73% Black, and many of the citizens were mercantile owners and merchants. This was the second largest city in Arkansas at the time, and they had the only college for African Americans. That college is now known as the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. This is a time when a lot of progress was being made, but yet at the same time, a lot of Black people were being lynched. The Arkansas Encyclopedia captured a story about one of those lynchings, and it perfectly captures the racial inequity of the time. On February 14, 1892, John Kelly was lynched in Pine Bluff for the murder of W.T. McAdams. At the time, Pine Bluff was the second largest city in Arkansas. The black population in Jefferson County was 73%, and there were a number of prominent African American landowners and merchants. The city boasted a black newspaper as well as the state's only college for African Americans. According to the Arkansas Gazette, on the night of February 9th, John Kelly and several accomplices allegedly murdered W.T. McAdams, an agent for the Obest Brewing Company and a highly respected Pine Bluff citizen. At 10:30 p.m., McAdams was walking near his home when someone hit him over the head with a dray pen. He screamed, alerting his wife. He then died of his wounds. When his body was found, his pistol and small amount of money were missing. The authorities investigated, and the following morning, the police arrested 2 black men, Gilbert Banks and a man named Smith, and 2 black women who had been seen in the neighborhood around the time of the murder. By the evening of February 10th, officials were looking for John Kelly as the probable murderer. According to the Gazette, if the parties obtain enough evidence to fix the murder on the parties arrested, there will be no need of a trial, as the citizens here are very indignant, and they would make an example at once of these guilty parties. The frequent murders of white men by Negroes in this country of late have aroused this community to a high pitch of excitement. Rumors that Kelly had been captured at Altheimer proved false, and deputies started for Helena, Kelly's home, to arrest him. Gilbert Banks, who had been arrested as an accessory, denied any involvement in the crime, but did say that he had seen Kelly the previous evening with a pistol and $5, which Kelly had said he had taken from a drunken white man. On February 14th, the police received a telegram that Kelly had been captured at Rison. Officers were sent there to bring him back to Pine Bluff by train. The news spread around town, and a mob of 200 armed men met the train at 9 p.m. Despite pleas from the mayor, the mob stopped the train and took the prisoner, marching him up the main street to the courthouse. By this time, the size of the mob had grown around 1,000. While the crowd yelled, a rope was put around Kelly's neck, and he was taken to the courthouse steps and given a chance to speak. He denied his guilt, saying that he had bought McAdams' watch. The crowd then hanged him from a telephone pole that stood directly across from the courthouse. During this process, he allegedly confessed that he had hit McAdams but did not intend to kill him. After he was strung up, more than 100 bullets were fired at him. Once Kelly had been hanged, the cry went up to hang Banks. Refused the keys to the jail, the mob found a telephone pole behind the courthouse and used it as a battering ram to break down the outer wall of the jail. A deputy told the members of the crowd if they did not break into the cell, he would send to Sheriff Frank Silverman's home for the keys. Banks was in a cell with a white man named Tom Bell. Though Bell was not involved in the McAdams case, the mob believed he was a suspect in another murder. After the keys arrived, Banks was taken from the cell and given the opportunity to speak. He denied being with Kelly at the time of the murder. He was then hanged from the same telephone pole as Kelly, and even more shots were fired this time. A report in the Chicago Tribune says that the accomplice hanged with Kelly was Colbert Harris rather than Gilbert Banks. A number of other newspapers, including the Sedalia Weekly Bazoo, said the same. Because it was Sunday night, large crowds of churchgoers, many of them women, were trapped downtown after church and witnessed these gruesome murders. The crowd then turned its sights to Tom Bell, but General H. King and Major N.T. White said to the people in the crowd that they had done good work and that the proof was not sufficient against Bell for them to lynch him, and advised them to go home, telling them he was secure should they want him at any time. According to the report in the Gazette, the mob was composed of some of our best citizens, and no masks were used, and everything transpiring could be seen by the bright lights and the moon. An additional article on the same page, dated February 15th, stated that John Kelly was today recognized as Ed Wilson, wanted at Brownsville, Tennessee for wife murder committed 6 years ago. A reputable citizen says there is no doubt that Kelly is the man. Kelly came here about 4 years ago and is thought to have committed several murders since. At least one African American newspaper was outraged at these events. Writing in the Kansas City American Citizen, Charles H.J. Taylor described those who participated in the lynching as cowards and brutes. While he mistakenly placed the lynching in Helena instead of Pine Bluff, he declared, "This happened in a town of churches. Is there no efficacy of prayer? Shame on every man and woman who wields the least bit of influence in relation to the Arkansas state government. If you remain silent, why should there be the least excuse for mob law against the poor Negro in this country? The whites of Arkansas, and for that matter, for every state in the Union, controlled entirely by the state machinery.
that a mob should be allowed in a country claiming to lead the world on religious lines to take unarmed men and hang them without any kind of trial. In the United States Senate, these same whites of whom these ruffians have come have been referred to as a noble race, a kingly race. Yes, indeed, such nobleness and kingly bearing would disgrace hell.
For Wiley Jones and his brother James to have truly made success out of that time period seems like a miracle. Knowing about everything that was happening at the time, I don't believe a rational person would have bet that they would have come out on top. But they not only defied the rules, but they defined new standards that inspired the community around them. One expert that I talked to didn't want to be named, but they said something that I'll never forget. They were creating success while running from the rope. As Pine Bluff grew a strong economy, the Jefferson County Immigration Bureau published a book that would entice people to move to Pine Bluff and invest in their city. This book was specifically created for the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Wiley Jones and his great deeds were mentioned several times as a prominent reason why investing in this city was a great idea. This book was to be passed around in Chicago at the enormously important event. This book that featured a black man's success as a prime feature was about to be handed out to what was probably the most recognized world event at the time. The problem was that black people weren't really welcome to be there, not unless you were a featured exhibit or a representative of another country other than America.
Your tactics are just the politics of the old world, and we see what they are. But you're not fooling me because I know all the secrets of the magic. I know how you put the rabbit inside the hat.
This limited podcast series is produced by the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative, a nonprofit organization with a mission to advance diverse podcast programming starting in its home of Arkansas. This podcast is produced, written, edited, and narrated by Ty King. This podcast was made possible by the Curtis H. Sykes Memorial Grant, supporting projects that preserve, commemorate, and enhance the heritage of African Americans in Arkansas. Funding is administered by the Black History Commission of Arkansas and funded by the Arkansas General Assembly through the Arkansas State Archives. If you want to hear the entire epic tale of Wiley Jones, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and watch the video format on YouTube. You can find links to all the platforms on our website at arkansaspodcasters.org/Wiley Jones.